Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. London never quite sleeps, it only changes tempo. That morning the city murmured beneath a slow, chill drizzle. Omnibuses sighed along wet pavements, and the Thames rolled past Westminster like dull pewter. Inside a narrow office off Great Marlborough Street, the sign on the frosted glass door still announced Blunt's brilliant detectives, though the gilt had lost some of its bravado. Within, a kettle hissed companionably, while Tuppence Beresford wrestled with a pile of unpaid invoices and a reluctant fountain pen. Tommy Beresford, meanwhile, sat behind his desk, reading the Times upside down. A habit developed, he said, to keep his mind alert. A clock ticked like a patient interrogator. Business had been scarce since their last misadventure, and even the telephone seemed to have succumbed to ennui. Then came the soft slap of paper through the letterbox. Tuppence looked up. Bills, she predicted darkly. But when she retrieved the envelope from the worn carpet, her brows lifted. No return address, heavy cream stock, and a faint singe along one edge. The flap was sealed with crimson wax, its impression blurred but still showing a fragment of a crown and the faint shadow of the letters M.I. "Government correspondence?" Tommy asked, suddenly interested. He took it delicately, as though the paper might explode from sheer self-importance. When he slit it open, a half-burned document slid out, the top corner blackened, the rest marked Operation Glass Veil, erased. Tuppence leaned over his shoulder. "Erased?" she repeated. "That's not the sort of word one expects from the Home Office. Sounds positively sinister." "Or bureaucratic," Tommy said. "They erase everything eventually. Files, budgets, consciences." Before Tuppence could retort, the telephone shrilled, abrupt and insistent. Tommy lifted the receiver. "Beresford here?" A familiar voice came down the line, urgent yet restrained. "Tommy, Gerald Penbury. We served together, remember? The logistics debacle at Boulogne." "Penbury?" Tommy's tone warmed. "What on earth—" "Listen carefully," the man cut in. "I can't discuss details over the telephone. It concerns a matter once under my department's supervision. Something called Glass Veil. Meet me this evening, under the Waterloo Arches. Alone, if possible. And Tommy, bring your wife. She's cleverer than you are." The line went dead. Tommy stared at the receiver, then at the scorched document on the desk. Tuppence folded her arms. "Well," she said, "either we're about to be handed the most thrilling assignment of our career or someone is practicing melodrama at our expense." "Either way," Tommy replied, reaching for his coat, "we'll need umbrellas." The drizzle had deepened into a thin, persistent rain by nightfall, turning the streets to mirrors that caught every gaslight and headlamp. Under the shadow of the station's iron girders, the air smelled of wet stone and coal smoke. Trains roared above like thunder from another world. Tommy checked his watch. 9 o'clock precisely. A whistle blew somewhere in the gloom. Tuppence stood beside him in a tailored raincoat, collar turned up, eyes bright with curiosity. "Romantic spot for an assignation," she observed. "I do hope he's not planning to sell us forged passports." From the fog emerged Sir Gerald Penbury, thinner than Tommy remembered, his once ruddy face drawn and pale. He glanced about nervously before approaching. "Thank heaven you came. I couldn't trust official channels. They've ears everywhere." "Who are they?" Tuppence asked. Penbury hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "I can't say much, only that Operation Glass Veil was meant to identify compromised agents after the war. Someone erased the records, and perhaps the people connected to them. A woman named Rose, one of ours, vanished. She may still be alive." He broke off, pressing a trembling hand to his temple. Tommy caught his arm. "Steady on, old man. You look ghastly." "Coffee," Penbury whispered. "I had some at a cafe nearby. Bitter taste. Odd." He staggered. Tuppence reached for him, but he crumpled to the wet cobblestones, convulsing once. Tommy knelt, loosening his collar, but the man's eyes were already glazing. Rain speckled his cheeks like tears. "Poison," Tommy said grimly. "Fast-acting. Cyanide, perhaps." Penbury's lips moved faintly. "Find what was erased." The final word dissolved in the hiss of steam as another train passed overhead. For a moment they crouched there, listening to the echo fade. Then Tuppence straightened, her voice tight but steady. Someone knew he was meeting us. Tommy rose beside her, scanning the dark archways. A solitary figure stood beyond the circle of lamplight, tall, motionless, umbrella angled against the rain. When Tommy stepped forward, it vanished into the mist. Police whistles shrilled in the distance. Tuppence tugged at his sleeve. "Tommy, we can't stay. We'd spend the night explaining ourselves to an inspector who'd never heard of Glass Vale. Help me with his briefcase." They lifted the small attaché lying beside Penbury. Inside were only personal papers, a photograph of a young woman in uniform, the initials RL engraved on a silver frame, and a single railway ticket stub to Waterloo. No notebook, no documents. Tommy frowned. Whoever poisoned him must have searched already. "Then the clue lies in what they missed," Tuppence said softly. Her gaze fell to the half-burned paper he'd pocketed that morning. The coincidence was too precise. They withdrew into the fog as constables' voices grew nearer. Under a sputtering street lamp they paused. Tuppence studied her husband's face, rain glistening on his lashes. "Well?" Tommy exhaled slowly. "We can either hand this over to Scotland Yard and spend the next month filling out forms, or we can find out why a perfectly respectable civil servant died muttering riddles about an erased operation." She smiled faintly. "I thought you'd never ask." Back at their office, the rain still murmured against the windows, persistent as a conscience. Tuppence lit the small gas fire while Tommy examined the charred document under the desk lamp. Only fragments were legible. Agent Rose Latham, debrief, file sealed by authority of ML. "ML?" Tommy repeated. "Could stand for Ministry of Labour or Major Latham. We knew a Latham in intelligence, didn't we?" "Yes," Tuppence said slowly. "A self-important man with too much hair pomade. He once tried to recruit us for a hush-hush job in Cairo." Tommy leaned back. "Then it seems Major Latham has returned to our story." They worked late, cross-referencing what scraps of wartime memory they shared. Operations, code names, rumours of agents turned double. Each clue only deepened the fog. At midnight, a sharp knock rattled the glass panel of their door. Both froze. No one sensible called at such an hour. Tommy crossed to the door, sliding his revolver from the drawer. When he opened it, the corridor was empty, except for a small envelope on the floor. Inside lay a single sentence typed neatly on official paper. "Stop looking. No signature, no address." Tuppence's eyes met his. "Well," she murmured, "that's practically an invitation." Tommy allowed himself a wry smile. "Then let's RSVP before the ink dries." He placed Penbury's photograph of Rose Latham on the desk beside the burned fragment and the anonymous warning. Outside, London's rain whispered like a conspirator through the night. The case had already chosen them. Morning found London under a sullen sky, the drizzle of the night before giving way to a pale, filtered sunlight that turned the city into a blurred watercolour. The clock above the post office struck 9 as Tommy and Tuppence Beresford stepped out of a black cab at the edge of Whitehall. The air here had a different chill, cleaner, sharper, bureaucratic. Men in bowler hats strode briskly between ministries, briefcases swinging like metronomes of government order. Tuppence tilted her hat to a rakish angle. "It smells of disinfectant and secrets," she murmured. Tommy adjusted his tie. "And the secrets probably last longer." He handed a folded sheaf of papers to the uniformed guard at the front steps of the grey stone building. "Beresford and Beresford, security consultants, appointment with Major Latham." The guard's eyes flicked over them with mild disdain before waving them through. Inside, the corridors of power were lit by a pale, pitiless light. The polished floors gleamed, reflecting anonymous shoes hurrying past. Typewriters clattered like distant gunfire. Somewhere, a telephone rang and rang unanswered. They were ushered into a waiting room where portraits of unsmiling statesmen looked down in sepia judgment. A clock ticked loudly enough to feel intentional. Tuppence crossed one leg over the other and surveyed the surroundings. "I've seen funerals with more cheer." Before Tommy could reply, the door opened and a woman secretary, efficient in pearls and steel-rimmed spectacles, announced, "Major Latham will see you now." The Major's office was spacious, ordered, and almost oppressively clean. The curtains were drawn back to reveal a precise square of London sky. Major Latham himself rose from behind his desk, tall, silver-haired, immaculately pressed, and smiling the way one might in a fencing match, politely while measuring distance. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, he said warmly. Delighted. I understand you've been consulting for certain private investigations. How can MI6 possibly assist? Tuppence, unruffled, took a seat. We were hoping you could tell us something about a late acquaintance of ours, Sir Gerald Penbury. He mentioned an operation called Glass Veil before his rather abrupt demise. The smile froze. Glass Veil? He repeated the phrase as though tasting something distasteful. I'm afraid I've never heard of it. Tommy tilted his head. That's curious. The name appears on an official document we received, bearing your department's crest, incidentally. Latham's eyes flicked down, then up again, smooth as silk. I assure you, Mr. Beresford, if such an operation existed, it would be far beyond your clearance level, and mine for that matter. Perhaps your source was misinformed. Possibly, Tuppence said sweetly, although it's difficult to mishear one's own name being whispered by a dying man. For the first time, Latham's hand hesitated as he reached for his pen. Indeed. Yes, she continued, studying him with a faint smile. Sir Gerald mentioned someone called Rose. Would that be Agent Rose Latham by any chance? The pen dropped, only for an instant, but long enough. The Major's expression reassembled itself with admirable speed. Coincidence, Mrs. Beresford. My sister's name happens to be Rose, but I assure you she was never employed in government service. The lie was elegant and unconvincing in equal measure. Tuppence rose. Well, it's been enlightening, Major. I do hope your department finds its missing paperwork. We'd hate to think something had been erased by mistake, Tommy added with studied politeness. We'll show ourselves out. As they turned toward the door, a young clerk entered, barely more than 20, pale and anxious, balancing a stack of files. He nearly collided with Tommy, muttered an apology, and dropped one of the folders. When Tommy stooped to help, the young man slipped a folded note into his palm with practiced discretion. Outside in the corridor, Tuppence murmured, Well? Tommy unfolded the paper. A single line, written in haste. Not safe here. Meet at Duke's Passage, 3 p.m. They exchanged a glance. The couple exited the building under the suspicious gaze of 2 uniformed guards. Once outside, Tuppence exhaled. I don't like it, Tommy. Latham's eyes are the sort that weigh coffins by habit. I noticed. And that tremor when you mentioned Rose. He glanced around. Whitehall loomed in all directions, the heart of government turned fortress. Whoever our mysterious clerk is, he's taking quite a risk. Then we'll make it worth his while, Tuppence said. They crossed the street to a small cafe frequented by civil servants who preferred their conspiracies diluted with weak tea. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and whispers. Tommy ordered coffee while Tuppence read a discarded newspaper headline, Soviet spy network rumoured inside British agencies. She tapped the page. You don't suppose this Glass Veil business ties into all that Red Menace gossip? Could be, Tommy said. Or it could be exactly what someone wants us to think. A good misdirection covers a multitude of bureaucratic sins. Behind them, a man in a bowler hat folded his paper and left. Another entered, standing too long at the counter. Tommy's instincts twitched. We're being watched, he said under his breath. Then let's give them something to watch. They lingered another 10 minutes, then exited arm in arm, chatting about weather and luncheon as if newlyweds. But as they turned the corner onto Downing Street, Tommy caught the reflection of a figure trailing them in a shop window. A woman, neatly dressed, her pale coat luminous against the soot-stained walls. She's been behind us since the cafe, Tuppence whispered. Keep walking, Tommy replied. If she's part of the show, we'll see who writes the script. By midday, they had gathered what fragments they could. A contact in the Foreign Office confirmed, after much hesitation, that a file bearing the title Glass Veil had once existed, but was destroyed during routine reclassification. Another hint suggested that Penbury himself had been under investigation for leaking information to the Soviets. Tuppence frowned over her notepad. So, our late friend may have been a traitor, or the man who caught one. Either way, someone didn't want him talking. Tommy sipped tepid tea, and that someone may still have an office upstairs. At 2:30 they left the cafe and began their slow walk toward Duke's Passage, a narrow lane near Trafalgar Square, known for antique shops and discreet assignations. The sky had begun to darken again, rain threatened on the horizon. As they crossed into the quieter street, Tuppence's gloved hand brushed Tommy's. "Do you think the note's genuine?" "I think," he said, "that any man desperate enough to pass it in Latham's office deserves a hearing." A car engine purred somewhere nearby. They reached the mouth of Duke's Passage, an alley flanked by warehouses and the backs of government buildings, empty, only puddles gleaming like mirrors. "Early," Tommy said, checking his watch. 10 minutes to 3. They waited, pretending nonchalance. The hum of traffic drifted faintly from the main road. Somewhere a church bell tolled the quarter hour. Then Tuppence stiffened. Across Whitehall, partly veiled by drizzle, stood the woman in the pale coat again. She was watching them, still, poised, expression unreadable. When she realized they had seen her, she turned abruptly, stepped off the curb and slipped into a waiting black taxi. Tommy dashed forward, waving for another cab. "Follow that taxi," he barked. But by the time they reached the corner, the vehicle had melted into the river of traffic. He stopped, rain misting his hair, frustration evident. She knew we'd be here, which means someone at Whitehall tipped her off. Tuppence looked down the deserted lane. Or perhaps she's not following us at all. Perhaps we're following her, and she knows exactly where she's leading us. The chill wind carried away her words, leaving only the echo of the traffic and the uneasy promise of their next encounter. Tommy slipped the folded note back into his pocket. "Duke's Passage," he murmured. 3 o'clock. Let's hope our friend turns up before we join Penbury in the obituaries. As the clock tower struck the hour, a solitary figure emerged from the fog at the far end of the alley, hat pulled low, coat collar high. And somewhere, unseen, the woman in the pale coat watched from the shadows. Moments later, the fog thickened. Where the alley widened, a knot of figures resolved, a constable's lantern circling a motionless shape on the stones. Tommy Beresford peered into the haze, one gloved hand resting lightly on the pocket of his coat where his revolver waited. "Charming spot," he murmured. "I should think all the best murders are committed here." "Don't be flippant," Tuppence replied sharply, scanning the mist ahead. "Our informant risked his position to contact us. If he's not here—" She broke off, pointing. A small crowd had gathered where the alley widened, figures half-formed by fog. Tommy's stomach tightened. The buzz of low conversation reached them, nervous, speculative. A constable's lantern swung, casting its restless circle over a motionless shape on the ground. The young clerk lay sprawled on his side, eyes wide open to nothing, his papers strewn across the wet stones. Tommy's jaw set. "We're late." The constable turned. "You there? Move along, please." "We're acquaintances," Tuppence said quickly. "We were to meet him at 3. The officer's face softened only slightly. "Then I'm sorry to inform you, miss. Looks like he was struck from behind. Robbery, they're saying. Briefcase gone." "Anyone see who did it?" Tommy asked. "Only a woman, sir. Pale coat, hat pulled low, ran off toward Regent Street. That's all anyone can tell me." Tuppence felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "She's leading us in circles," she whispered. But Tommy was already scanning the alley floor. She dropped something. He crouched and retrieved a torn scrap of brown paper, half-soaked and nearly illegible. Only 2 words remained intact. Bloomsbury House. They reached Bloomsbury by twilight, the fog thinning to a greasy dusk. The boarding house stood on a narrow street of identical brick facades, its brass nameplate dulled with age. Curtains glowed faintly from within. The smell of cabbage dinner hung in the air. A landlady of uncertain cheer opened the door. "Yes?" Tuppence smiled with the effortless warmth of a woman who had once sold ration cards to generals. "Good afternoon. We're looking for a friend who may have stayed here. Mrs. R. I believe she called herself." The woman pursed her lips. "Mrs. R? Ah, yes. Quiet lady. Came and went odd hours, kept herself to herself, checked out last night." "Left anything behind?" Tommy asked, letting a £5 note appear as if by accident. The landlady's eyes softened. "Come in, then." She led them upstairs to a modest room with wallpaper patterned in faded roses. The air smelled of cold perfume and dust. The single suitcase on the bed was open, empty save for a torn lining and a small jewellery box. Inside it lay a broken locket, one half missing its clasp, the other holding a tiny photograph of Sir Gerald Penbury. Tuppence stared. She knew him. Tommy frowned. Or loved him. On the dressing table lay a scrap of paper in looping feminine hand. The erased remember. Tuppence whispered the phrase aloud. What does that mean? Tommy's eyes narrowed. Perhaps that not everyone erased stays gone. She ran her fingers over the locket. It's been broken deliberately. Someone tried to destroy the link between them. Love affair? Betrayal? Tommy shrugged, though his gaze had grown thoughtful. Whichever it was, it's left corpses in its wake. He moved to the window and peered out. The fog had returned, coiling thickly across the street lamps. A car sat idling on the corner, headlights dimmed. Inside, two silhouettes waited motionless. Visitors, he murmured. We've acquired an audience. Tuppence glanced at the clock. You think it's the police? I think if they were, they'd have knocked already. He crossed the room, lowering his voice. Pack the locket and note, quickly. The front bell rang below. A door creaked, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. Too late, Tuppence breathed. Tommy slipped his revolver free, hiding it under a newspaper on the dresser. The footsteps halted outside the door, and a calm, official voice called, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, internal security, open up, please. They exchanged a glance. The words sounded plausible, but too smooth, too perfectly timed. Tommy opened the door a crack, revealing two men in plain suits. The elder carried an air of authority. The younger's hand rested inside his coat pocket. Routine inquiry, the elder said. We understand you've been in contact with a deceased government official and a clerk under investigation. We'd like a few questions answered. Tuppence smiled thinly. You'll forgive us, but we've answered quite enough questions for one day. Could we perhaps see your identification? Certainly. The man reached into his pocket, then lunged. Tommy slammed the door shut in time. A bullet splintered the wood where his shoulder had been. So much for routine, he muttered. They fled across the small landing, Tuppence ahead, ducking through a service corridor that smelled of coal and polish. Another shot rang out, followed by the shouts of pursuit. Backstairs, Tommy barked. They burst into the alley behind the house, the rain now falling hard enough to blur the world into streaks of silver. The car engine roared to life somewhere nearby. Left, Tuppence shouted. They'll expect right. They sprinted through the narrow passage, boots slapping puddles, until they reached the brighter glow of the main street. The traffic swallowed them mercifully. Omnibuses, bicycles, umbrellas. Only when they had ducked into the safety of a crowded tea room did they pause, breathless. Tuppence's hat was askew, her cheeks flushed with both fury and exhilaration. Well, she said, that confirms it. We've moved from curiosity to liability. Tommy leaned back, catching his breath. Our charming impostors knew exactly where to find us, which means either the landlady made a call or someone's watching every move we make. He glanced through the rain-streaked window. Across the street, a woman in a pale coat stood beneath a lamppost, motionless as a statue. When a cab passed, she was gone. Tuppence followed his gaze. She's real, then. Oh, she's real, Tommy said quietly. And she's always one step ahead. Tuppence's fingers brushed the broken locket hidden in her handbag. She knew Penbury. Perhaps she loved him, perhaps she killed him, but whatever erased means, she's the key to it. Tommy smiled grimly. Then let's find her before internal security, or whatever they truly are, finds us. The waitress appeared with their tea, smiling as if the world were ordinary. But outside the fog thickened again, swallowing shapes and lamplight alike. Somewhere beyond the veil, a pale coat moved through the mist, and the hunt entered its next act. The Surrey countryside wore a melancholy dignity that morning, shrouded in low clouds and a mist that smelled faintly of damp earth and coal smoke. Tommy Beresford leaned against the open door of a country taxi, squinting up the gravel path that led to a cottage half buried in rose bushes. Their blooms were past their prime, soft pink petals scattered like faint memories across the garden. Picturesque, he murmured, if one doesn't mind the possibility of being shot for trespassing. From somewhere beyond the hedges came a gruff voice. Stand where you are, and don't even think about the gate latch unless you can name the brand of tea served in Cairo in '43. Tommy grinned. Still using passwords, Colonel? A tall, spare man appeared, pruning shears in hand. Colonel Avery looked older than Tommy remembered, white-haired, ruddy-faced and armoured in tweed, but his eyes still carried the steel of wartime intelligence. "I'd ask what the devil brings you here," Avery said, "but I imagine it's trouble. You never call unless it's that." "Quite right." Tommy followed him through the gate. "I need to pick your brain about an old operation, Glass Veil." Avery stopped dead. "Good Lord, you've stepped into a hornet's nest." They settled in the conservatory among the roses. The colonel poured tea, strong, military grade, and spoke in low tones. "Operation Glass Veil. I was peripheral to it, you understand. Late 47, right after the Soviet defector scare. The assignment was to expose double agents within British intelligence. A clean sweep, they called it. Only it didn't go as planned. Files vanished, witnesses resigned or died. Within a year, every trace of the operation was classified, then purged." "Purged by whom?" Tommy asked. Avery's eyes darkened. "That's the question. The order came from very high up. The reasoning was national integrity. When the final reports went missing, no one dared ask further. I thought it buried for good." Tommy leaned forward. "Until now. Sir Gerald Penbury mentioned it before he died, and I have reason to believe someone's making sure no one else remembers." Avery sighed, setting down his cup. "Penbury always did dig too deep. If he got himself killed, it means the old shadows are awake again. Be careful, Beresford. In this game, curiosity is treason by another name." He plucked a dead rose petal, turning it between his fingers. "There was one agent, though, Rose Latham. Bright, idealistic. Rumour said she died during the final stage of Glass Veil, though I never saw confirmation. Some whispered she knew too much about who ordered the purges." Tommy's mind ticked over. "Rose Latham, R.L. Major Latham's sister." "Family ties can be the most dangerous of all," Avery muttered. "If she's alive, find her quietly, or not at all." Meanwhile, back in London, Tuppence Beresford was living a small lie to uncover a larger truth. The National Archives building loomed over her like a stone sentinel, its windows reflecting the grey afternoon. Inside, the air smelled of dust, ink, and bureaucratic indifference. Dressed in a modest skirt, glasses, and sensible shoes, she looked every inch the civil service typist. Anonymous, efficient, invisible. A borrowed identification badge swung from her blouse. The name read Miss Patricia Longley, Records Division. She smiled politely at the desk clerk, whose moustache twitched with professional boredom. "I've been sent to verify the declassification of some late 40s personnel files," she said briskly, "specifically Ministry Attaché G section." He nodded vaguely. "Basement, room 7C. Mind the steps." The descent felt symbolic. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer, until she emerged into a cavernous room lined with metal filing cabinets that stretched into the gloom like the ribs of some slumbering beast. A single overhead bulb flickered, creating a rhythm of light and shadow that made her pulse quicken. She worked methodically, drawers squealing open and shut. Penfield. Penbury. The folder should have been there, wedged between Pemberton and Penketh. It wasn't. Tuppence frowned, double-checked the surrounding files, then pulled the drawer completely free. Inside the empty space was a small, penciled note in the margin of the cabinet's inventory card. "File retrieved. By R.L." Her breath caught. Rose Latham again. A sound echoed behind her. Footsteps on the stairwell. She froze, listening. The rhythm was deliberate, unhurried. Male. Tuppence closed the drawer silently, slipped the note into her handbag, and adjusted her glasses. When the man appeared, she was bent over a random drawer, humming faintly. He was middle-aged, tidy, with the expressionless calm of someone used to being obeyed. "Miss, Longley, is it? All well down here?" "Oh, yes," she said brightly, "just completing a cross-check on transfer codes. Ghastly handwriting on some of these." "Quite." His eyes travelled to the cabinet she had just closed. "We prefer to keep certain records restricted. I do hope you haven't overstepped your clearance." She smiled thinly. "I wouldn't dream of it." The silence that followed felt as fragile as spun glass. Then he nodded curtly and turned away. She waited until his footsteps vanished before exhaling and hurrying up the stairs. Outside, rain had begun again, whispering across the pavement as she flagged a taxi back to their flat. Tommy returned from Surrey an hour later to find Tuppence perched by the fire, hair damp, a look of fierce satisfaction on her face. "Well?" she asked. He shrugged off his coat. "Colonel Avery confirms our worst suspicions. Glass Vale was a purge, double agents, internal betrayals, the whole dirty business, and someone erased it from the books, possibly Major Latham. Her eyes gleamed. Then he's been lying from the start. I found this. She handed him the scrap-marked file retrieved by RL. He turned it over in his fingers. So Rose Latham herself, or someone using her name, took Penbury's file, meaning she's alive. Or someone wants us to think so, Tuppence countered. Suppose Major Latham used his sister's initials as a mask. No one would question a ghost. Tommy smiled grimly. You're beginning to sound like me. That's how you know we're in trouble. They compared notes, Avery's warnings, the missing file, the phrase the erased remember. Piece by piece the pattern formed, a wartime operation buried beneath layers of deceit, its survivors hunted or vanished. Tuppence poured coffee, her movements brisk, but her tone pensive. I keep thinking of that photograph in the locket, Penbury and Rose, side by side, smiling. If she loved him, perhaps she tried to save him. If she hated him... She had reason, Tommy said. If Glass Vale destroyed lives, someone had to carry the guilt. Maybe that someone was her. A knock interrupted them, 3 sharp raps that made both look up. Expecting anyone? Tuppence asked. No. Tommy crossed to the door cautiously and opened it onto an empty corridor. Only a folded newspaper lay on the mat. He picked it up, scanned the front page, and felt a cold ripple of unease. A red pencil circle marked a small obituary. Sir Gerald Penbury, private funeral held yesterday, cause undisclosed. They've buried him fast, Tommy muttered. Too fast. Tuppence started to reply, then froze. Tommy. He turned. Their living room was no longer as they had left it. Cushions flung aside, drawers yanked open, papers scattered like fallen leaves. Someone had been inside, and recently. Tommy dashed to the desk. The small tin box where he'd hidden the burned fragment of Operation Glass Vale was empty. He swore under his breath. Gone. Tuppence surveyed the disarray with a tight jaw. So they know exactly what we have and what we don't. They're not just cleaning history anymore, Tommy. They're cleaning house. The fire popped sharply, sending a spark into the darkness. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the hum of an engine fading into the rain-soaked night. Tuppence met his gaze. We're out of time, aren't we? Tommy straightened, his expression hardening into resolve. Not yet. Whoever they are, they've forgotten one thing. What's that? He smiled faintly. The Beresfords don't erase easily. As thunder rolled distantly over London, the last glow of the fire reflected in Tuppence's determined eyes. Somewhere in the night, the ghost of Rose Latham moved again, and the mystery of the vanished file had only just begun. The Savoy Hotel at 9 o'clock was an orchestra of quiet civility, china clinking softly, newspapers rustling, and waiters moving like trained dancers across a stage of polished parquet and discreet gossip. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, glinting off the silver teapots and the crystal jars of marmalade, transforming the breakfast room into a mirror of London's composure, the sort of composure that could hide 100 scandals. Tommy Beresford folded his Times with deliberate leisure, though his eyes weren't on the headlines. He's late, he murmured, glancing toward the revolving door, which means he's either nervous or wants us to think he's important. Tuppence buttered her toast with a precision that could have disarmed an army. You invited an MI6 officer to breakfast, she said. They don't exactly spring from bed whistling. He'll come, Tommy replied. Men like Latham don't miss opportunities to control the narrative. As if on cue, Major Latham entered, immaculate in dark grey, his every movement disciplined. He paused to sweep the room with a practiced glance before approaching their table. His manner radiated the kind of authority that came from knowing everyone had something to hide. Beresford, he said with forced warmth, extending a hand, and Mrs. Beresford, I must say, this is unexpected. Not half as unexpected as our last conversation, Tuppence replied lightly. Do sit down. You'll find the marmalade quite sincere. The Major allowed himself a thin smile and settled opposite them. You've been busy. My department has noted your recent excursions. Tommy poured tea. Yes, the pleasure's mutual. It's comforting to know someone's watching over us, even if they do so from the shadows. Latham's jaw tightened. You misunderstand. My concern is for your safety. There are elements within and beyond this country that prefer certain matters remain in the past. Like Operation Glass Veil? Tuppence asked casually. The Major's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. He set it down deliberately. That name should not be spoken, Mrs. Beresford. It's classified beyond your comprehension. Oh, I wouldn't underestimate our comprehension, she said, especially since we seem to be cleaning up its aftermath. Latham leaned back, recovering composure. I see. You believe there's a grand conspiracy, no doubt involving me personally. He smiled faintly. I assure you, I am a loyal servant of the Crown. Tommy stirred his coffee with lazy precision. Loyalty is a complicated thing. So is family. The Major's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Tommy reached into his coat and laid the broken locket on the table between them. Inside, the miniature photograph of Sir Gerald Penbury gleamed faintly beneath the chandeliers. Recognize the gentleman? Tommy asked. The mask cracked just for a moment. Latham's hand twitched, brushing the edge of the locket before withdrawing. I can't say I do. Odd, Tuppence murmured. Your sister Rose could. She carried this until quite recently. The Major's eyes flicked upward, his composure restored but his voice a degree too smooth. My sister is dead, Mrs. Beresford. Has been for years. Tommy smiled thinly. That's the official story, yes. But we've learned that official stories have a tendency to skip the interesting chapters. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint hiss of a waiter refilling cups. Latham broke it with a sigh that sounded almost genuine. You want the truth? Rose was naive, idealistic. She fell in with dangerous people after the war, communist sympathizers, if you can imagine. When her betrayal came to light, she vanished. MI6 buried the embarrassment quietly. And you believed she betrayed you? Tuppence asked softly. He looked at her, expression unreadable. I believe she betrayed everything I served. Tommy studied him carefully. Funny thing, Major. When people lie, they tend to over-explain. Latham's smile returned, brittle now. You'll forgive me if I don't linger. I have a meeting at the Ministry. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, rose, and placed his hat precisely upon his head. My advice, Beresford, leave ghosts buried. They seldom thank their rescuers. He turned and strode out, his reflection passing through the mirrored pillars until he vanished altogether. For a long moment, Tommy and Tuppence sat in silence. The waiter approached discreetly to clear the plates. As he lifted Tommy's saucer, a small folded slip of paper fluttered onto the table. Tuppence caught it before the waiter could notice. Unfolded, it revealed 4 words in block capitals. Look to the artist at Battersea. They exchanged a glance. Well, Tommy said, I'd say breakfast was productive. The Thames wore its evening coat, steel-grey water under a sky bruised by sunset. Battersea was quieter than central London, but its warehouses and narrow streets hummed with unseen life. Cranes creaking, barges knocking against the docks, and the smell of turpentine drifting from the artist's quarter. The address on the note led them to a riverside studio tucked behind a row of shuttered workshops. A faint glow leaked from one upper window. The brass plate beside the door read Amelia Harcourt, portraitist. Inside, the air smelled of paint, linseed oil and cigarette smoke. Canvases leaned against every wall, faces half-finished, haunting in their incompleteness. Amelia Harcourt herself emerged from behind an easel, wiping her hands on a paint-stained smock. She was in her 40s, angular and elegant, with the sort of eyes that seemed to have seen too much beauty and too much war. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, she said without surprise. I wondered when you'd come. Tuppence smiled. We were delayed by breakfast diplomacy. I understand you may have known a woman named Rose Latham. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. She came to me a week ago, nervous, pale, looking over her shoulder as though the walls had ears, asked for a portrait, said she needed to be remembered as herself, not what they'd written about her. Tommy's pulse quickened. So she's alive. Yes, and frightened. Amelia crossed to a large canvas draped with cloth. She said they'd erased her name, her history, everything. She wanted proof she'd existed. She lifted the covering slightly to reveal a half-finished painting, a woman in a pale coat, eyes luminous with something between defiance and sorrow. Tuppence drew in a breath. It's her. Amelia replaced the cloth quickly. She paid in cash, asked me to hide the portrait until she returned. She never did. Tommy's voice hardened. Did she say who was after her? The artist hesitated. Only that she'd once trusted the wrong man. Before Tuppence could press further, a sound shattered the fragile calm. A sharp crack, followed by the splinter of glass. The window behind them exploded inward. Tommy lunged instinctively, dragging Tuppence to the floor as another shot echoed through the studio. "Down!" he barked. Amelia gave a cry and staggered, clutching her arm. Blood trickled between her fingers. Tommy crawled to the edge of the window frame, peering into the darkness outside. Across the river, a dim rooftop glinted momentarily, rifle scope catching the streetlight. Then the figure melted into the fog. Tuppence pressed a handkerchief against Amelia's wound. "You're all right. Just a graze." Amelia managed a weak laugh. "That's what I get for painting the truth." Tommy helped her to a chair. "Someone doesn't want you talking." "They never do," she whispered. "You need to find her before they do." Rose knew something that could bring down men still in power. Her eyes fluttered. "There's more. Hidden under—" Her voice faded as she slumped against the chair. Tuppence knelt beside her, checking the pulse. "She's alive, just fainted." Tommy moved quickly, searching the work table. Beneath a jumble of brushes and sketches, he found a small envelope sealed with paint. Inside lay a single photograph. Rose again, standing outside a nondescript building marked Pier Pavilion, Brighton. He met Tuppence's gaze. Brighton. "Seaside holidays are overrated," she said grimly. The wail of a siren sounded in the distance. Someone had heard the shots. Tommy pocketed the photograph and helped Amelia onto the couch. "We'll send help back for you. Lock the door and trust no one until the police arrive." Amelia's voice was faint. "They'll come before the police." Tommy flagged down a constable 2 streets over. By the time the siren reached the riverside, Amelia had her wound bound and orders to give no statements. He looked at her sharply. "Who will?" "The ones who erased her," she murmured. Outside, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the street lamps and curling around the river like smoke. Tommy and Tuppence slipped into the mist, the echo of gunfire still ringing faintly in their ears. Tuppence glanced back once at the shattered window, where the pale curtain fluttered like a wounded flag. "She said Rose wanted to be remembered," she whispered. "If we fail, she won't be." Tommy took her hand. "Then we don't fail." They vanished into the night, the Thames rolling silently beside them, its dark waters carrying more than secrets, and its fog whispering of the ghosts still to come. The morning after the shooting dawned bruised and grey. A damp mist clung to Battersea, softening the jagged silhouettes of warehouses and cranes into something ghostly and uncertain. The streets smelled of coal smoke, river water and turpentine, a faint, uneasy perfume of secrets. Tommy and Tuppence stood outside Amelia Harcourt's studio, now sealed off by police tape that fluttered in the chill wind like a warning flag. An inspector in a rumpled raincoat muttered something about unregistered firearms and foreign agents, but released them once it became clear they were officially unimportant. Officially. Inside, the chaos of the previous night had frozen in place. Shards of glass littered the floor. The overturned stool still bore a smear of blood where Amelia had steadied herself, and the smell of oil paint mingled with the metallic tang of gunfire. The portrait of Rose Latham, half finished, half erased, still dominated the room. Tuppence walked slowly toward it, her heels crunching on glass. "Look at her, Tommy. It's uncanny. You can almost feel her staring back." He studied the painting. The left side of the woman's face was bright and alive, eyes vivid, expression searching. The right side, however, was an abstract blur, layers of pigment scraped away to expose the bare canvas beneath. It was as if 2 identities struggled for possession of one face. "She was trying to tell us something," Tommy said quietly. "The erased side. It's not just artistic metaphor. It's deliberate." He picked up a palette knife from the floor, inspecting the frame. Something about the gilded edge caught his attention, a faint line where wood met canvas, as though it had been tampered with. "Tuppence, give me that letter opener." A moment later, he pried open the frame's back panel. Dust spilled out, followed by a tiny glint of metal, a sealed capsule no larger than a coin. Tuppence gasped softly. Microfilm. He nodded, holding it up to the light. Inside the transparent coil he could just discern the ghostly outlines of documents, stamped with official crests. Whatever this is, Rose wanted it hidden and safe. Tuppence's eyes flicked to the doorway. Hidden from Major Latham, perhaps? Or hidden from everyone, Tommy said grimly. We'll have to get this developed. Before they could move, a faint rustle behind them made them spin round. Amelia Harcourt stood there, pale but upright, her arm in a sling and her expression taut with exhaustion. I should have known you'd come back, she said. Detectives never leave unfinished pictures. Tuppence crossed to her at once. You shouldn't be here, Amelia. The police are asking the wrong questions, Amelia interrupted. They think it was a robbery, but I know better. They weren't after me. They were after her. She nodded toward the portrait, or rather, what she left with me. Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. We found it, he said simply, holding up the capsule. Relief flickered in Amelia's eyes, quickly followed by despair. Then it's already begun again. She sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. You must understand, Rose came to me because I owed her my life. During the war, I worked in intelligence sketching enemy officers from witness descriptions. She was one of my contacts, a bright, fierce woman who still believed truth mattered. She told you about Operation Glass Veil, Tuppence asked. Amelia nodded. In fragments. She said the operation began as a purge to identify double agents, but it was corrupted. High-ranking officials falsified evidence, condemning innocents and sparing their own spies. When Rose discovered it, she tried to expose them. They declared her unstable, erased her records, and tried to make her disappear. The irony, she added bitterly, is that she succeeded too well. Even her allies stopped believing she existed. Tommy leaned against the window frame, his expression dark. And the documents on this microfilm? Proof, Amelia said simply. Names, orders, forged confessions, all of it. She told me one of the names still worked in government, protected by rank and fear. Tuppence frowned. You didn't tell us this last night. I couldn't trust you, Amelia said softly. Not until I saw what side you were on. Too many people come asking about Rose, and not all of them survive long enough to explain why. A silence stretched, filled only by the creak of the building and the faint hum of riverboats outside. Tommy broke it. Then you'll understand if we return the favour and ask where Rose went after she left you. Amelia hesitated, then retrieved a folded slip of paper from her pocket. She gave me this address. Said she'd found somewhere safe, a boarding house by the sea in Brighton. She said the waves made her feel invisible. Tuppence took the note carefully. The handwriting was elegant, hurried, and unmistakably female. Mrs. R. Langford, Pier View Rooms, Brighton. Did she mention anyone following her? Amelia's gaze went distant. Only that she feared one man above all others, the one who'd ordered the erasures. She never said his name, but she called him the Keeper. Tommy slipped the microfilm into his breast pocket. Then it's time we paid the seaside a visit. That night, Victoria Station was a symphony of motion. Trains whistling, porters shouting, steam hissing from engines like restless ghosts. Under the great iron arch, travellers hurried through the fog with collars turned up, each wrapped in their own purpose. Tommy and Tuppence boarded the 10:15 night train to Brighton with minimal luggage and maximum caution. Their compartment was quiet, lined with worn red velvet and the faint scent of tobacco. Tuppence peered through the glass as the platform slid away. We've crossed from espionage into melodrama, she said. Do you ever feel we've accidentally stepped into one of those ministry thrillers? Tommy smiled faintly. If so, I'd like the script to include a happy ending. Outside, London's lights dwindled, replaced by the rolling black of the countryside. Inside, the carriage rocked gently, a rhythmic lullaby broken only by the occasional squeal of brakes. Tuppence leaned closer, lowering her voice. Do you think Amelia told us everything? No, Tommy said without hesitation. She's frightened, and with good reason, but she gave us enough to follow. And this microfilm, whatever's on it, it's worth killing for. She glanced around the empty corridor. Speaking of killing, have you noticed the man 2 compartments down, the one pretending to read the Telegraph upside down? Tommy nodded. I saw him bored after us, too polished for a common tale. MI6? Or worse, a zealot with permission to clean up messes. They fell silent as the conductor passed, collecting tickets. When he moved on, Tommy rose casually and opened the corridor door. The man in question, a nondescript gentleman with a bowler hat and umbrella, turned a page with exaggerated calm. Tommy sauntered past, glancing in the reflection of the window. The man's eyes followed him in the glass, definitely watching. Returning to the compartment, Tommy sat opposite Tuppence and murmured, "He's ours. Keep your handbag close." "Why?" she asked. "Because the microfilm's not in my pocket anymore," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Tommy!" "I slipped it into the lining of your bag while we boarded. A small precaution in case someone decides to relieve me of my coat." She exhaled. "Remind me to scold you for cleverness later." The train thundered through the dark countryside, lamps flickering past like heartbeat pulses. Somewhere behind them, a door creaked open. Tommy's hand moved to the revolver concealed beneath his newspaper. "He's coming," he whispered. The handle turned. A polite knock followed. "Tickets again?" Tuppence called brightly. The door opened an inch and stopped, blocked by Tommy's foot. The stranger smiled faintly through the gap. "Forgive the intrusion. You dropped your newspaper on the platform." "How kind," Tommy said. "Unfortunately, it wasn't mine." For a moment, their eyes locked. Two men trading silent recognition of danger. Then the stranger tipped his hat. "Good evening." The door clicked shut, footsteps retreating. Tuppence let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "We can't sleep." "No," Tommy agreed. "And we can't stay in this compartment either. If he's what I think, he won't stop at conversation next time." At the next stop, they disembarked briefly, pretending to stretch their legs before reboarding into a different carriage at the far end. By the time the whistle blew, the man in the bowler hat was nowhere in sight. The train lurched forward again, plunging into the night. Rain began to patter against the windows. Tuppence leaned her head against the glass, watching her reflection blur in the streaking lights. "A seaside boarding house," she murmured. "I wonder if Rose is still there." Tommy's reply was quiet but certain. "If she is, we'll find her. And if she isn't, then we'll find who wanted her gone." The rhythm of the wheels carried them onward toward the coast, toward a fog-shrouded pier, and toward a truth that refused to stay buried. Outside, the dark fields gave way to the whispering sea, but neither of them noticed the solitary figure at the rear of the train, standing by the door, gloved hands steady on a small revolver, waiting for the right moment to strike. Minutes later, as the 10:15 hammered past Redhill, the corridor lights flickered. 2 compartments ahead, low voices threaded through the clatter. Brighton disposal, no witnesses. Tommy's hand tightened on the armrest. Tuppence's fingers brushed her handbag lining. The lamps died, total black. A strangled gasp, a heavy thud, then the lights stuttered back. One man slumped glassy-eyed against the window, the other gone. The train was already braking for the emergency stop. Inspector Fraser, a lean man with tired eyes and the faintest trace of sardonic humour, listened patiently to their account. "So," he said at last, "you're telling me the lights went out, and when they came back on, one man was dead and the other had vanished into thin air." Tommy nodded. "That's the size of it." Fraser arched a brow. "And you didn't see the killer?" "In the dark," Tuppence said dryly. "We're good, Inspector, but we haven't developed nocturnal vision." He suppressed a smile. "Well, you're lucky. The weapon's missing, and our murderer may have slipped off before the stop. Still," he looked down at the evidence spread across his desk. "We found this near the body." He held up a small ticket stub. "Pier Pavilion, Brighton, admit one." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "The pier again," he murmured. Fraser frowned. "You recognize it?" "We've heard it mentioned," Tommy replied carefully. "Perhaps it's where our missing friend intends to finish his business." The inspector tapped the ticket thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it's where it began." He sighed and leaned back. "In any case, you'll have to remain in town until the inquest. Routine procedure." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "We wouldn't dream of leaving, Inspector. Brighton sounds positively restorative." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and washed clean. Seagulls wheeled over the rooftops, their cries echoing through the waking town. The sea shimmered beyond the promenade, deceptively calm. Tommy and Tuppence walked arm in arm through the early mist, their bags delivered from the station. The faded grandeur of Brighton surrounded them, hotels that had once hosted royalty now peeling with salt, cafes opening sluggishly for breakfast, the faint scent of brine and old perfume hanging in the air. They stopped before a modest hotel facing the water. The sign read, "The Regency Arms, Rooms with a View." The paint was chipped, the curtains yellowed, but the clerk behind the desk offered them polite anonymity for cash, just what they needed. "Mr. and Mrs. Langford," Tommy told him. "One night only." The man nodded and handed over the key. "First floor, end of the hall." Their room overlooked the sea. Through the window, the famous pier stretched out like a silver finger into the fog, its lights still faintly glowing though the sun had risen. Tuppence drew the curtains halfway and turned to Tommy. "So, what do we know?" He lit another cigarette, pacing slowly. Two men discussed a Brighton disposal, likely referring to Rose. One's dead, the other vanished. The dead man carried a ticket to the pier pavilion. "And the phrase written in chalk," she added. "The guard mentioned it, on the inside wall of the carriage. The erased are alive." Tommy nodded. "That's the message, all right. Either from Rose herself, or someone working for her." Tuppence leaned against the dresser, thoughtful. "Then the pavilion isn't just a rendezvous point. It's a statement. She wants us there." He turned to the window again. "Or she's luring us in." She smiled faintly. "You always did love a seaside holiday." He returned the smile, though his eyes were hard. "I'd prefer fewer corpses on this one." Toward evening, they walked along the promenade toward the pier. The wind carried the tang of salt and fried fish, and the wooden planks creaked beneath their feet. The pavilion loomed ahead, a once grand ballroom now half-shuttered for repairs, its faded bunting fluttering weakly in the breeze. A caretaker sweeping near the entrance paused as they approached. "Closed till evening," he said without much conviction. Tommy flashed a friendly grin. But my wife and I were hoping to see the view from the end of the pier. Romantic notion, you know." The man hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, but mind the floorboards. Some of them go straight through." They stepped inside. The hall smelled of salt, dust, and forgotten music. Sunlight spilled through cracked windows, catching on a shattered chandelier. At the far end, the sea glittered through open shutters. Tuppence ran her fingers over a discarded theatre poster. "Look, Tommy, the pavilion used to host dances during the war. Imagine the secrets exchanged under these lights." He crouched near the wall, studying a faint mark in chalk. Fresh, deliberate. The words repeated, "The erased are alive." He traced them lightly with a finger. "She's been here, recently." A gull cried outside, startled into flight by something unseen. Tuppence straightened. "We should leave before someone decides to make us erased as well." Tommy nodded slowly. One more glance around. They split up, each searching among the abandoned tables and tattered curtains. At the base of the stage, Tuppence found a torn corner of newspaper, foreign print, Cyrillic letters, and a smudge of ink shaped like a thumbprint. She called softly, "Tommy," but before he could reach her, a shadow flickered across the far door, swift, silent, gone. He rushed to the exit, flinging it open to the blinding light outside. Only seagulls wheeling against the morning sky. Tuppence joined him, clutching the scrap. "Whoever they are, they know we're here." He glanced down the length of the pier, where the mist still clung to the railings like a shroud. "Good," he said grimly. "It means we're close." They turned back toward the town, their silhouettes framed by the silver horizon, two figures moving deeper into a web that had begun long before either of them had boarded that train. Morning came late to Brighton. The sea was a slab of dull pewter beneath a whitening sky, and the gulls screamed as if mocking the notion of peace. The storm of the night before had left puddles gleaming across the promenade, where the smell of salt, old fried fish, and rusted iron mingled in the breeze. The pier itself stretched out like a tired relic of another age, its painted railings flaking, its kiosks shuttered, its glamour dulled by time and neglect. Only the pavilion at its far end retained any hint of former glory. Its faded dome caught the thin sunlight, glimmering faintly like a memory that refused to die. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford stood at the entrance, collars turned up against the wind. "Cheerful spot," Tommy murmured. "I do love a seaside holiday filled with death and intrigue." Tuppence's smile was faint. You'd prefer palm trees and cocktails, I suppose. Not at all. Give me a good murder, and I'll forget about sand between the toes. A figure appeared from behind a closed shooting gallery, a wiry man in a threadbare coat, carrying a broom and an expression of practiced melancholy. His hair was thin and white, his face carved by the sea wind into deep, knowing lines. "Morning," he rasped. "You're early for the amusements. They don't open till noon." Tommy flashed his most harmless grin. "We're not here for amusements, Mr. "Bennett," the man supplied. "I keep things tidy here. Been on this pier near 40 years. Not that it's much to keep tidy anymore." Tuppence studied him. "We're looking for someone, Mr. Bennett. A woman who may have rented a stall here recently. Pale coat, quiet voice, the kind people forget easily." He paused mid-sweep, eyes narrowing. "I might have seen her. Week or so back. Took one of the craft stalls by the pavilion. Said she was selling painted shells. Paid in cash. No fuss." "Did she give a name?" "Mrs. Langford, maybe? Or Latham. Something with an L." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. "She didn't stay long," Bennett continued. "Left in a hurry after some men came asking about her. Government sort, if you ask me. Suits too neat, smiles too cold." "Do you know where she went?" Tommy asked. Bennett shook his head. "No, but she left something behind. Locked that stall tight. Been meaning to clear it, but—" he shrugged. "Didn't feel right somehow. Like the place was watching me." They followed him along the wooden planks, the sea murmuring beneath. The wind carried the faint sound of a carousel tune from some forgotten record player inside the pavilion. It felt less like music than a ghost refusing to stop dancing. The stall in question sat near the end of the pier, small, with its sign half torn, shells and souvenirs. Bennett produced a ring of keys and unlocked it. The door creaked open to reveal a clutter of trinkets, sea-polished glass, and the faint scent of lavender. Tuppence moved carefully among the shelves, her gloved hand brushing over a box of postcards. "Look at this, Tommy. Each card addressed but never sent." Tommy leaned over. Every one bore the same neat handwriting and the same unfinished phrase, "I was wrong. Forgive me," followed by an abrupt dash. Bennett frowned. Odd thing, that. She sat writing those for hours one day, then tore most of them up. Tuppence bent down suddenly. "Tommy, the floorboard." A single plank beneath the counter looked newer than the others. She knelt, tugged at it, and it lifted easily, revealing a narrow compartment beneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a small leather-bound book. Tommy whistled softly. "Rose's diary, unless I miss my guess." Bennett took a cautious step back. "That's her writing, all right. She'd sit there scribbling, looking out to sea, like she was arguing with ghosts." Tuppence opened the first page. The ink had run in places, but the entries were still legible, taut, precise, filled with the restrained desperation of a woman unravelling in secret. "December the 2nd. I have proof now. The operation was falsified. Latham covered it up to protect his position. Men died, innocents, and I helped. God forgive me." Tuppence read on in silence. "If this ever reaches anyone, if anyone still cares, tell them I didn't mean for it to happen. I only wanted to save the service from rot. But the rot was already at the top." Tommy's voice was low. She blamed herself. "She was protecting him," Tuppence murmured. "Latham, her brother." Bennett shifted uneasily. "That name again. She said it once when the tide was loud. Said she'd end it before he could." Tommy turned a few more pages. "Here, listen. They're watching me. I can't hide forever. If I disappear, it won't be by choice." The sound of the wind filled the silence that followed. Then came the shot. It cracked across the morning air like lightning on metal. Bennett's broom clattered to the floor as he staggered back, confusion flashing across his face before he collapsed. "Down!" Tommy shouted, dragging Tuppence behind the stall's counter. Another bullet splintered the wood above them, sending shards raining down. The echo of footsteps pounded across the pier. Tommy risked a glance through the gap in the boards. A figure was sprinting toward the far end of the pier, a woman in a pale coat, her hair streaming behind her like a banner. "Tommy!" Tuppence's voice shook. "That's her! It must be Rose!" He started forward, but she caught his arm. "The diary. We can't leave it." He hesitated only a heartbeat before snatching it up and tucking it inside his coat. Then they were running, boots thudding on the slick boards. The fog was thickening, rolling in from the sea. Shapes shifted and dissolved ahead of them. The sound of the waves rose to a roar beneath. "Rose!" Tuppence called out. "Stop! We know the truth. We can help you!" No answer. Only the rhythmic slap of footsteps and the creak of the wind-tossed pier. Tommy reached the end first, where the railing opened onto the lifeboat steps. For a moment, he saw her clearly, a woman standing at the edge, coat billowing, her face pale and resolute. "Rose!" he shouted. "You don't have to run!" Her eyes met his across the distance. For an instant, something like peace flickered there. Then she turned, and with a single graceful motion leapt into the mist. Tuppence cried out. Tommy lunged forward, but there was nothing to see, only the endless grey veil of sea and sky closing over her like a curtain. A siren wailed faintly from the shore. Somewhere behind them, a crowd was gathering near Bennett's fallen body. Tuppence clutched Tommy's sleeve. "She's gone," he nodded grimly. "For now." They stood for a long moment at the railing, the wind tugging at their coats. Below, the sea rolled and sighed, indifferent as ever. Then Tuppence said softly, "She left us something." Tommy glanced at her. "The diary?" She nodded. "And the message she kept writing. I was wrong. Forgive me." She wanted to clear her name, but she also wanted to expose her brother. He took her hand gently. "We'll finish it for her." They turned back toward the shore, their figures small against the vast sweep of the pier. The morning light was brightening now, burning away the fog, revealing the pavilion behind them, its windows shattered, its banners torn. Tommy looked back once more. "You know, Tuppence," he said quietly, "people like Rose don't vanish forever. They linger in memory, if not in flesh." Tuppence's reply was thoughtful. Then perhaps that's what she meant by the ghost of the pier pavilion. Not herself, but the truth she left behind. He smiled faintly. Let's hope the truth can swim. By the time they reached the promenade, the constables had cordoned off the pier. The sea was already beginning to swallow the footprints leading to the end. Tuppence glanced back one last time. "Do you believe she's dead?" Tommy adjusted his hat against the wind. "I believe she wanted us to think so, and until we know otherwise, we'll keep looking." They walked on in silence, the sound of the waves fading behind them, replaced by the cries of gulls and the distant laughter of early tourists. Life going on, oblivious. In Tommy's coat pocket, the diary pressed against his chest, warm from his body heat. Inside, the last entry trembled on the page, written in a hand that had known fear and defiance both. "If you're reading this, it means the veil is lifting. Truth cannot be erased. It only hides, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek it." Tommy looked out toward the horizon where sea met sky. "Well," he murmured, "we've never been accused of being cautious." And with that, they turned back toward the town, toward the next thread of the mystery, and the shadow of the woman who refused to stay erased. London welcomed them back with fog thick as treacle and twice as clinging. It rolled through the streets like an exhausted beast, blurring lamps and swallowing sound. The city had never looked more like a stage prepared for betrayal. Tommy Beresford guided the motorcar through the half-empty streets of Westminster, his jaw set, his eyes on the pale gleam of headlights ahead. Beside him, Tuppence sat with Rose's diary open on her lap, its final page catching the faint glow of the dashboard lamp. "Listen to this," she said quietly. "If they come for me, they'll find nothing but art. The truth will hang where the blind admire it, and the guilty pass beneath." Tommy gave a short whistle. "Art. Sounds poetic for espionage." "It's not poetry," she replied. "It's instruction. Rose hid the copies in paintings, 3 of them, according to this entry." She traced the final line with her gloved finger. Each fragment framed in beauty, unseen but unforgotten. Battersea, Bloomsbury, Belgravia. Tommy shot her a look. "The galleries." She nodded. "The Battersea piece, Amelia's portrait of Rose. The second, the Bloomsbury canvas she mentioned sketching for a private collector. And the last, Belgravia. That must be where the final copy lies." He turned the wheel sharply. "Then we'd best start where art and sin overlap." By mid-morning, they stood before the Bloomsbury repository of portraiture, a dowdy archive masquerading as a gallery. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and old ambition. The curator, a man with the expression of a perpetually inconvenienced owl, eyed them suspiciously. "The Harcourt collection, you say? I'm afraid that portion is in private storage." Tommy produced a folded letter, borrowed, not forged, from a retired colonel. "Special authorization," he said, cheerfully. "You know how it is with veterans, sentimental attachments to portraits and whatnot." The curator hesitated, then relented with a sigh. 5 minutes. They entered the dim storage room. Paintings leaned like weary sentinels against the walls, their frames coated in dust. Amelia's distinctive signature gleamed faintly on one. Tuppence knelt beside it, running her fingers along the inner edge of the frame. She always hid something behind beauty. Tommy pried open the backing with a small penknife. Inside, a hollow recess held a slip of photographic film, brittle but intact. He slipped it into his pocket. 2 down. As they turned to leave, footsteps echoed in the hall. Too quick, too purposeful. Tommy extinguished the lantern. "We're not alone." The door creaked open. A silhouette filled the doorway, then vanished as suddenly as it appeared. When the light flickered back, a single glove lay on the floor. A woman's, pale and damp. Tuppence whispered, "Rose?" But the corridor beyond was empty. Their next stop, a Belgravia private salon, offered a harsher welcome. It was crowded, smoky, and filled with the chatter of collectors and dilettantes discussing brushwork as if it were politics. A painting near the far wall caught Tuppence's eye, a still life of lilies in a glass vase signed E.H., Amelia Harcourt's initials. The placard read, "Private collection, not for sale." Tommy leaned close. "That's one of hers." "Which means it's one of Rose's." Before they could move, a tall man in a dark coat approached, his expression bland and official. "Mr. and Mrs. Langford?" "Depends who's asking," Tommy said lightly. "Ministry of Defence," the man replied, flashing an identification card. "I'd like a word." "Sorry, old boy," Tommy said. "We're late for luncheon." He turned, pulling Tuppence with him toward a side exit. Behind them, the man's voice sharpened. "Stop them!" Chaos erupted. Patrons gasped as chairs overturned and a waiter dropped a tray of glasses. Tommy and Tuppence darted through the servants' corridor, ducking beneath a half-drawn curtain. The alley outside stank of rain and coal smoke. Tommy slammed the door shut behind them. "Well," Tuppence said, breathless but smiling, "that confirms it." "What? That we're popular?" "That MI6 doesn't like art criticism." They didn't stop until they reached the embankment, where the fog rolled thick off the river. Tommy pulled the first microfilm from his pocket. 2 recovered, 1 left, and something tells me Belgravia won't be a quiet stroll. That evening, the city felt suspended in time. Rain slicked the cobblestones, neon lights bled into puddles, and the air buzzed with the sense that something long hidden was about to be dragged into the light. Their final lead took them to a townhouse on Eaton Terrace, immaculate, white-fronted, and guarded by silence. According to the records, it belonged to a collector named Mr. Halpin, known for acquiring patriotic art. Tuppence studied the door. "Do we knock?" Tommy shook his head. "We're past niceties." Inside, the drawing room glowed with lamplight. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of soldiers, diplomats, and nameless women, all staring out with knowing eyes. Then Tuppence saw it, the last of Amelia's pieces. A portrait of a woman half-turned, her expression unreadable, her hand resting on a closed folder stamped "Top Secret." Tommy approached carefully. "There it is, the file that wouldn't die." He loosened the frame, revealing once again the concealed cavity. Inside lay another strip of microfilm, this one marked with a date and code. "Glass Veil, Final Phase." "Got it," he said softly. But before he could pocket it, a voice spoke from behind. "Put it down, Beresford." They turned. Major Latham stood in the doorway, revolver steady in his hand. His raincoat dripped onto the carpet, his face pale and composed. "I should have known it was you," Tommy said evenly. Latham stepped forward, eyes cold. "You've meddled in affairs far beyond your understanding." "Call it a bad habit," Tuppence replied, "though it does seem to upset people with guns." His smile was humourless. Glass Veil was never about moles or leaks. It was a purge, A sanctioned series of eliminations, enemies, allies, inconvenient witnesses. Rose was part of it, until she lost her nerve. Tommy's voice hardened. You mean she realized it was murder? Latham's jaw tightened. It was necessary. The country was rotting from within. I cleaned it. By erasing names, Tuppence said quietly, including hers. He glanced at her, something almost regretful in his eyes. She was my sister. She knew too much. She forced my hand. Silence settled, a heavy, mournful pause broken only by the rain tapping against the window. Tommy took a slow step forward. You can end this, Latham. Hand us the revolver and the truth. Let the record speak. The Major's mouth twisted. You still don't understand. There is no record. There never was. He raised the gun. This ends now. A shot cracked, but not from his weapon. Latham staggered, shock flashing across his face as crimson bloomed on his chest. The revolver clattered to the floor. He looked down, bewildered, then toward the shadowed balcony. From behind the curtain, a figure stepped forward, a woman in a pale coat, face drawn and bloodless, but unmistakably alive. "Hello, brother," Rose Latham said. Her hand trembled around the small pistol, smoke curling from its barrel. "You always were a dreadful liar." He took a step toward her, breath rasping. "Rose, you should have stayed dead." "I tried," she whispered. "You wouldn't let me." He fell to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. Then he collapsed, the sound of his body hitting the carpet swallowed by the storm outside. Tuppence moved first, rushing to Rose's side. "You're hurt," Rose managed a wan smile. "It's nothing, not compared to the ghosts I've carried." Tommy knelt beside the fallen Major, checking for a pulse. "He's gone." Rose's gaze drifted to the painting, the hollow frame still open, the secret exposed at last. He thought the truth could be buried under duty. But the truth doesn't die, Mr. Beresford. It waits. Tuppence squeezed her hand. "You don't have to run any more." Rose shook her head faintly. "I'm afraid running is all I've ever done." Her voice softened. "Take the film. Tell them what we were, what they made us." Tommy slipped the final reel into his pocket. "We will." But when he looked up again, Rose was gone, only the whisper of her coat fading through the open door, into the rain and the darkness beyond. By dawn, the city had changed. Headlines would soon scream of "scandal in the service," but for now, London slept, unaware that its secrets were bleeding into daylight. In their small flat, Tommy placed the 3 reels of microfilm on the table. The early light glinted off them like captured truth. Tuppence poured tea, her hand steady. "Do you think she'll survive?" He looked toward the window where the fog was beginning to lift. "She's survived worse," she nodded. "And Latham?" "History will decide what to call him," Tommy said quietly. "Hero, murderer, patriot. It's all the same word, depending on who's writing." Tuppence reached across the table, touching his hand. "And us?" He smiled. "We'll file our report, burn the kettle, and find another case. That's what we do." Outside, the bells of St. Margaret's began to toll, their chimes rolling through the fog like a benediction for the lost. Tommy pocketed the microfilm, straightened his tie, and said softly, "Come on, old girl, let's go tell the truth." They left the flat hand in hand, stepping into the thinning mist, 2 figures walking toward whatever light the morning chose to offer, carrying the proof that no veil, however thick, could hide the ghosts forever. Rain fell again in London, steady, unhurried, and indifferent. It traced thin silver lines down the window panes of Whitehall, softening the stone facades of power and washing the city in its familiar melancholy. In another office, in another corridor, men were drafting memoranda that would never be read, and signing papers that would never be filed. The machine rolled on, as it always did, leaving the debris of truth in its wake. For Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, the affair of Operation Glass Veil had ended, at least on paper. The headlines had said nothing, of course. There had been no trials, no speeches, no public reckoning. Officially, nothing had happened at all. But unofficially, that was another matter entirely. Whispers had begun to stir across Whitehall, quiet resignations, abrupt retirements, the discreet reassignments of men whose names had once carried weight. Files were burned in confidential stoves, reports rewritten to omit certain inconvenient details. Somewhere in the dim corridors of power, the very phrase glass veil had become a ghost no one dared name aloud. And in a quiet hospital room on the outskirts of the city, the woman who had refused to stay erased was learning to breathe again. The ward smelled faintly of antiseptic and carnations. The rain tapped softly against the window as Rose Latham sat propped against her pillows, a book unopened in her lap. Her face was still pale, her right arm bound in a sling, but her eyes, those remarkable watchful eyes, were steady. When the door opened, she smiled faintly. "I hoped it would be you." Tuppence entered first, her umbrella dripping politely on the tile, followed by Tommy carrying a small bouquet that looked as if it had been chosen by someone more accustomed to field reports than florists. "We thought lilies would be too funereal," Tommy said, setting the flowers on the bedside table. "And roses seemed tactless." Rose laughed softly. "You have a knack for diplomacy, Mr. Beresford." "Years of marriage, Miss Latham," Tuppence said. "It either teaches you tact or ruins your sense of humour." Rose's expression softened. "You found the truth, then?" Tommy nodded. 3 reels of microfilm and 1 very talkative revolver. Latham's confession is, well, it won't make the papers, but it's enough. She was quiet for a moment. He was a patriot in his way. He thought he was saving the service. I only wanted to save what was left of our humanity. Tuppence looked at her gently. "And you did. You've given the truth back its name." Rose met her gaze. "Do you ever wonder if truth is just another form of treason?" "Only when it's the kind that embarrasses the powerful," Tommy said dryly. That drew the faintest smile from her. "You two have a dangerous habit of asking questions that don't belong to you." Tuppence's voice was kind. "We've built a career on it." A nurse appeared in the doorway, brisk and unobtrusive, reminding them the visit must be short. Tommy and Tuppence rose. Rose reached out, her fingers brushing Tuppence's hand. "If they come for me again—" "They won't," Tuppence said firmly. "And if they do, they'll find us in the way." Rose's lips curved faintly. "Then the world isn't entirely lost." Tommy tipped his hat. "Get well, Miss Latham. The world's shorter on decent people than it likes to admit." As they left, Rose turned her face toward the rain. It blurred the skyline outside her window, washing the city to silver and shadow. "You can't erase what remembers," she murmured. Later that afternoon, the Beresfords' office at Blunt's Brilliant Detectives was as they'd left it, untidy, comfortable, and distinctly their own. The radiator hummed like a cat in the corner, the typewriter sat ready for another dictated adventure, and on the desk a half-drunk pot of tea steamed beside the morning's post. Tuppence set down her coat and crossed to the window. "Do you realise," she said thoughtfully, "that in a few short weeks we've gone from the Cotswolds to counterintelligence?" Tommy poured himself a cup of lukewarm tea. "Occupational hazard of being versatile. I prefer to call it idiocy." She smiled faintly, looking out at the rain-slick street. "I miss the ordinary kind of crime, the jealous husbands, the stolen heirlooms, the village scandals with names like the affair of the poisoned scone." He grinned. "And here I thought you liked saving civilization." "Oh, I do," she said. "But it's untidy work. No tea sets, no neat confessions by the fire. Just frightened people making bad choices and men in offices pretending not to notice." Tommy sat back, studying her. "You're thinking of Rose?" "I'm thinking of everyone like her," Tuppence replied quietly. "People who loved their country so much they forgot to love themselves." He nodded. "Patriotism's a fine thing, until it starts picking its own victims." She glanced at him, half smiling. "That's very philosophical of you." "Don't tell anyone," he said. "It would ruin my reputation for cheerful incompetence." They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rain. For a time, neither spoke. The office felt oddly peaceful, as if even the ghosts of the case had agreed to rest. The clock ticked gently, the tea cooled, and outside, London moved on, omniscient, indifferent, eternal. Then Tuppence noticed the envelope. It lay neatly on the desk beside Tommy's ashtray, unmarked except for a single red stamp across the flap. "Top secret." She picked it up, turning it over thoughtfully. "This wasn't here when we left." Tommy looked up. "Postman?" She shook her head. "No mark, no address." He smiled wryly. "Well, that's encouraging. We've barely closed one conspiracy and another's already knocking. Tuppence set the envelope down but didn't open it. Do you ever tire of it, Tommy? The endless secrets, the running about, the late-night revelations. He considered. Sometimes. But then I remember what you said once, about truth being like tea. She raised an eyebrow. Did I really say that? Yes. You said if you leave it too long it goes bitter, and if you gulp it down too fast it burns. Tuppence smiled, pouring 2 fresh cups. Sounds sensible enough. What's your point? He leaned back, watching the steam curl upward. I suppose the trick is learning to sip. She handed him his cup, eyes twinkling, and to know when to stop. For a moment they simply listened, to the rain on the window, the low hum of the city beyond, the quiet heartbeat of a world that never truly slept. Then Tuppence set down her cup and reached for the envelope again. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Well, partner? Tommy met her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting. After you, old girl. You opened the last one. She hesitated, then smiled, sliding her finger beneath the seal. The flap gave with a soft tear, the sound lost beneath the whispering rain. They exchanged a look, half weariness, half anticipation, the familiar glint of curiosity that had carried them through 100 improbable cases. Whatever lay inside, they would face it together. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's began to toll, their echoes weaving through the fog. The camera of imagination might have pulled back then, out through the rain-smeared window, across the restless city, where lights gleamed like embers and the river murmured secrets no one dared write down. The hum of London grew louder, steady and eternal, and in the small office on the corner of Great Marlborough Street, 2 detectives sat side by side, ready as ever for the next mystery that dared to find them. Fade out.